Hey, it's Kev. Welcome. Killer episode today with Cole Schafer. Cole is doing a lot of inspiring stuff. He's a poet. He's got 3 or 4 books of poetry, and he really brings his art to our craft. And it's inspiring to see his work. He's writing for less traditional direct response driven products like cookies, for instance. Last Crumb, these cookies that are sold by the batch in a box of like 12, and they sell out in like 10 minutes every week. It's amazing to hear the story of how this cookie company is marketing their product, and driven by Cole's creativity, his copy. He named all the cookies. He's just doing a lot of cool stuff, and I'm a fan. And it's been a while since I've really become a fan of a copywriter. Not to say there's not a lot of copywriters doing great work. It's just, been a minute since somebody really got me intrigued, and Cole has done that. So I know you're going to love this episode, and also I think be inspired by Cole and how he's looking at stuff and what he's doing. And also he is going to be a presenter at Copy Chief Live, our freelancing transformation boot camp. And I specifically asked Cole to be part of it because he is a new voice in the industry and doing it in an unconventional way, which I find really cool and refreshing. So if you want to learn more about what Cole does, obviously you want to get on his list, and you want to be at Copy Chief Live November 9th, 10th, and 11th. He'll be speaking and teaching along with folks like Laura Belgray and Paris Lampropoulos, David Deutsch. We got legends, we got new breeds, we got people who are doing stuff that we want to model and find inspiration from. So that's what the event's about, and it's going to help you take your career to the next level going into the new year. So check us out at copychief.live right now. Enjoy this episode with Cole Schafer. Hey, welcome back. It's Kev. Thanks for being here. I appreciate your time and attention. And today, I've got Cole Schafer from honeycopy.com. If you're not familiar with Cole, you're about to really appreciate that you're meeting him, because he's a copywriter, he's a poet, and he's just doing really cool stuff in a different way than we see it done a lot, particularly in the world of direct response. I don't think he quite considers himself a direct response style copywriter. We'll get into some of that, but really refreshing, very cool. I've purchased not only his copywriting course, which I think is fantastic, and also one of his books of poetry, which he, I believe, has 3 of now. So if you're a writer first who is fallen in love with copywriting, or is enamored by the idea of having a freelance career as a copywriter, but don't always love what the traditional view of copywriting looks like, I think you're really going to enjoy getting to know Cole and how he approaches it a little differently. So Cole, thank you for being here.
Man, I'm stoked to be here. And I was going to say, you have a great radio voice.
Thanks. Back at you, man. I listened to a few of your interviews. I'm like, wow, I can't even get that deep.
That's funny. So for all my podcasts, because I don't consider myself, well, I think I'm getting a little bit better, but speaking has always been a challenge for me. And so I hired a podcasting coach. So like before I ever jump on a podcast, I will talk with my coach. His name is Joe Ferrero. But anyways, he said, like, in prepping for this one, he's like, you guys might have some issues because you both have sort of similar sounding voices. And I thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah, that crossed my mind too. But I think they'll know when something really cool is being said, you'll know it's Cole. That's my tip to the listener. Speaking of that, dude, I got to tell you, this is something. So just to give everybody some context, January Black is your sort of nom de plume as a poet, correct?
Yes. It's my alter ego.
Yeah. And there is a video on YouTube. I think it's under the name January Black. And it's you essentially spoken word of one of your pieces. And man, it is so cool. I've watched it a bunch of times. It's just the way you did it stylistically, really cool. I wanted to ask you about it, particularly because you're talking about sort of prepping your voice and wanting to be thoughtful about how you speak. I'm really curious about how you prepared for that read and kind of how you shot that video, because it really comes off cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that was the work of about a year of working with my coach. So I don't think I could have done that a year or 2 years ago. But in prepping for it, what I did was I actually would just practice in the shower. So every day, like I would leading up to it, I'd jump in the shower and would actually recite the entire piece from front to back, because it was really important to me that that piece was a one take sort of piece. So not being edited and spliced, but all the way through. I mean, it probably took me a couple dozen times to just say it in the shower, fuck up here, fuck up there. And then finally, like I got to this place where I was like, damn, I'm kind of getting chills saying it. So I think the listener might feel a little something too. And then the day of, I showed up to this venue in East Nashville. It was this really shitty looking building, but once you walked inside, it was kind of like a videographer's or photographer's heaven on earth. I mean, it was really gorgeous inside with all this cool antique furniture. And then there was this giant white room in the basement where when you looked at it through a lens, everything, the corners of the room just evaporated. So it almost looked like you were speaking sort of in this someplace between like heaven and earth. Like it was really strange, but it made for a really cool aesthetic. And I took like 2 or 3 shots of whiskey and then just ripped it off real quick. And I think we did 2 or 3 takes, but the first take ended up being the best. And that's what we ran with.
Interesting. Yeah. Look I'll link it in the show notes, but it's After Her by January Black. Definitely want to look this up on YouTube. That's cool that you read it in one take. And it reminds me of, I did stand-up comedy for a decade, and it reminds me of working out a bit that I was going to try. A similar process. Putting it on paper is one thing, but I'd have to hear it and I'd have to feel it. So you could really practice it a lot before you went and performed it. But then in the moment, it changes so much because you have a live crowd there. For you, I know what it's like when you're sitting there and there's maybe a few people standing around, you're staring down that lens, but you nailed it in that first take. So it was like you just built it up and killed it. And then after that, maybe started tweaking it too much, or was it just, it was ready to sort of burst out in that first read?
Yeah, I think it was just ready to burst out in that first read. I know really great performers have kind of talked about you prepare a bunch to make the performance look easy. And I felt like it looked easy, but it was a lot of hours like nailing that piece down. But I still wouldn't put that in the same league as doing stand-up comedy. That I think would be absolutely terrifying. And it is a different kind of writing because you actually see on the faces of the crowd in real time their responses to what you're saying. Like as a writer, a lot of times you can kind of hide behind the page, right? So if you wrote a shitty paragraph or that headline wasn't quite there, that poem wasn't spot on, you could, the reader just flips the page and you never feel like they're disgust or anything like that. So you can't bomb, or at least you don't see yourself bombing as a poet.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I guess the equivalent of that would be reviews, right? If you got a really shitty review, I always feel bad when I read a really bad book review because I think, oh man, that's got to be in your head when you sit down to write the next time, or you definitely have to find a way to get it out of your head. With stand up, you got a show the next night usually. So it's like, all right, you only have to suffer for 23 hours and you can't wait to get back on stage and redeem yourself. But man, with a book, if somebody gives you shit about it, it's like, how do you remove that? Or maybe you use it as fuel the next time you sit down to write. Have you dealt with any of that?
I have. I mean, I've definitely gotten really nasty emails or reviews or comments, and I think they're never easy, but as I've gained a little bit of notoriety as a writer, I just don't read them. And so I think something to keep in mind when you're getting feedback is everybody has an opinion on anything that you do, but there's only a handful of people whose opinions are actually beneficial to what you do. So if there's a writer who you respect that comes to you and says, "Hey, Cole, you're pulling punches here. This just isn't a good piece. I don't know what's going on." You should pay heed to that. But if some dumbass who has only maybe written a best man speech wants to tell you how to write, you have to have the confidence to say, "Okay, well, I appreciate you sharing, but I'm gonna go ahead and keep doing this my way." And I think it also something like you have to bring up here is Teddy Roosevelt's "Man in the Arena," right? I'm sure everyone who's listening is familiar with that, but it really raises this question of who do you want to be? Do you want to be the man or woman in the arena that's actually going head to head with a bull, or do you want to be the person in the stands critiquing the man or woman in the arena going head to head with a bull? And I've always chosen the former, right? I want to be in the arena. I want to have some skin in the game. And so I don't have a lot of respect for people who heavily critique other people's work for a living.
Agreed. Yeah, great point. And love what you said about sort of like developing not only skin, but a filter. I like to tell new or freelance copywriters that I think the moment you become a true writer is when you crave the harsh critique, particularly on sales copy, because at that point, all you care about is the end result. And as importantly, you've developed your own filter for which criticism and advice to actually act on. And that's the thing. I think in the beginning, it's not only hurtful sometimes to hear that somebody doesn't think your stuff is good or wants to, red inks it, but also not knowing if they're right or not. And over time, you develop a filter to where you can safely and gleefully ignore bad advice.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
Talk a little bit more about the poetry. What's next for it? Do you have a schedule? So, I'd put out a book a year, or do you just take it as it comes creatively?
It might not be fair to say generally this is how writers write, but I think a lot of times writers, from my vantage point, it seems like writers generally approach books by sitting down and writing an entire book from start to finish, like cover to cover. And it takes 3 months, and there's editing, and there's shipping it out to the market or putting it out in front of publishers. And how I work on my books is I'm actually writing, 6 or 7 books at one time, but the material of those books is coming from newsletters, and it's coming from the poems that I'm regularly publishing on Instagram, and it's coming from like my articles on my site. And so I think like for me, the strategy of holding myself up in a room, writing an entire book, not sharing it with the world, it just doesn't work, because so much of what I do, like I am very much so a marketer, right? And I think that the best way you can market your work is by showing your work, right, in real time.
Right.
And so to answer that question, I have 3 or 4 books that are getting to a good place in the next year. And it's not like they're novels by any means, but they're poetry collections. There's another book called Chasing Hemingway that will be a curation of all the weekly newsletters I send out for a paid newsletter that I run. And then I'm also working on another book that'll be almost like I'm hoping to be like a really beautiful sort of coffee table book called Stranger Than Fiction. And it's just about crazy marketing ideas that have worked for brands and people. And I ran that newsletter for 2 years and decided to shut it down, but wanted to take it and turned it into something. And so that'll be a book too.
That's great. I love all that. And so I was going to ask, so how do you know what a certain piece goes in a certain book? But it sounds clear, like they're almost for different markets and have different intentions.
Sure. Yeah. I always know. I mean, I kind of look at what goes into a book as a funnel, right? And you just naturally, like as you write, because my writing is so split up, poetry, there's poetry, then there's like long form kind of essays about life and writing. Then there's very like advertising and business related stuff. And those are all so separate that it's easy to just sort of siphon them down into whatever manuscript I'm working on.
Yeah. What was your introduction to ad copywriting? When did that start?
When I was in high school, my senior year, I went to work for a small advertising agency in Evansville, Indiana, that actually had a really large account in Heaven Hill distilleries, which owned like Larceny whiskey and like several really large liquor brands. They did some really good work. And at the time, I was just an intern and I wasn't allowed to do any sort of creative work, but it was close enough to a kind of Mad Men-esque sort of environment that it kind of became intoxicating a little bit too. I mean, it was sort of old school where the creatives and the copywriters would come up with an ad, and then they would actually like go back to this back room, print it out, put it on poster board. And I remember one day I was invited to go to this presentation where they were presenting all the ads that they had came up with for this particular liquor company. And I was there in the room, and there were like 17 different ads, and they laid them out all across the room. And that was sort of when I was like, oh, this whole advertising thing is cool. But at that time, I was so young that it just kind of seemed like magic. And I didn't really know what copywriting or like what a graphic designer was. I was just sort of in it, and maybe not even in it, watching from the outside. Yeah. But I'd say that kind of planted the seed, but I didn't really act on it, obviously, for, like another 6 years, I think.
That's really interesting. So you didn't end up in that internship because you wanted to be a writer or necessarily do anything creative. It was almost by chance. Interesting.
Just by chance. Yeah. I actually played the CEO of the agency. I played basketball at this local athletic club where there were a bunch of guys that got together every weekend and they just hooped. And he and I became like, he was in his 40s, but I think he just thought I was had some potential and said, hey, I'll let you be an intern here. But it wasn't like I was working underneath him. It was very, very much so an intern sort of job.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I distinctly remember the moment I thought advertising looked cool was in a movie with Tom Hanks and Jackie Gleason called Nothing in Common. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie. It's actually a really good movie. Hanks is a creative director, at an ad agency. One of the B or C storylines is that they're having to work out this ad, this problematic ad, and just seeing the collaborative creative process of them with their feet up on the desk, throwing pencils into the ceiling and brainstorming ideas. I was like, wow, that looks like something, that probably never feels like work. That just looks fun.
Right.
And then years later, you end up basically creating that for yourself. It's kind of funny, like that you and I have that in common, where you went through different portals of what this looks like once you got enamored with it. I think you worked at an agency for a while, right? And realized that was not the environment for you. And now you've created this sort of universe for yourself where you get to wake up and work on projects that excite you, write to an audience that admires you, appreciates learning from you. It's pretty cool, huh?
Yeah, it's you're right. Like there's always moments where you're like, shit, this isn't very fun. But most of the time I feel really fortunate because I'm getting to wake up and do the stuff I enjoy. And if you feel like there's a problem, it's generally a creative problem, and there is something exciting about solving those.
Hey, it's Kev here. Have you heard? Copy Chief Live is 100% virtual this year. Fine, you win, COVID. We're not going to try to get everybody together in person with all your weirdness hovering around. We'll just wait for that. You know what we're going to do instead? We're going to take all the time, energy, and money that would have went towards that chaos and instead focusing it on creating the most incredible, dynamic, interactive, virtual experience you've ever had. That means you get to encounter the industry's top event for connecting copywriters with business owners, companies, publishers who are ready to hire you right now. You get to keep your finger on the pulse of what's working right now in marketing and in copywriting. And of course, you get everything we've learned over the last year on how to grow your freelance business. Get booked, stay booked, all of it from your favorite chair. That's right. You don't have to come to us this time. We're coming to you. We're bringing all the fun energy, the world-class experts, the down and dirty, do this, not that tactics, and our crazy successful client roundtable experience right to your living room. It's going to be off the chain, Jane. Confirmed speakers already. Best-selling author Mike Michalowicz, Laura Belgray, Paris Lampropoulos, Ryan Lee, Selena Sue, Dean Jackson, David Deutsch, Adrian Dorson, and more to come. This is far from more Zoom calls. This is next level multimedia experience with as real as it gets, digital connecting, learning, and doing. It's all happening November 9th, 10th, and 11th. Go to copychief.live to get your pass, and I will see you there. Can't wait. So you cite Hemingway, Steinbeck as bigger influences on your copywriting, even than like Halbert or Schwartz. Is that accurate? You'd say you think more like a fiction writer and would want to come across more with those kind of ideas than typical ad copywriting.
Sure. So Steinbeck is someone I very much so respect, but I wouldn't say he's been an influence. I would say mainly it's been Hemingway, Charles Bukowski, which I will put an asterisk there and say, like, if you do choose to read him, just be aware that he was a nasty writer, but he was a beautiful writer. He wrote really well. Those two were huge. Besides that, there's been a lot of books like Stephen King's on writing, changed kind of how I look at writing. I would say that Anne Lamott's Bird by Bird. I mean, so yeah, but I've learned, I feel like I learn more from reading fiction than I do reading direct response and reading more business style books. But one thing I will say too is, like, I think it's important to recognize what you're good at. And I have read, Gary Halbert. I've read those direct response writers, and I have a deep respect and admiration for how they approach writing. But I pretty quickly gathered that that's I could work at that, but I don't think I could ever become great in that particular world. And so I feel like I try to approach writing more from like a creative poet, kind of creative advertising approach with sales in mind. But I wouldn't feel like right by calling myself a sales copywriter. I just think there's too many people that are too good at that. And that's not a place I want to try to compete in.
Yeah, I definitely feel you on that. It's, when I talk to people that go all in on that, it really is a lifestyle. When I talk to the big publishers who are very hungry for new copywriters all the time and say to them, what's your criteria? I said, what do you look for in somebody who you think will have potential? And they're basically looking for a young person with no other priorities than becoming great at writing long form sales letters. They'll forget the hours, forget the whatever it is. They'll move to a place they don't want to live. They'll work hours that nobody should, and they'll just be fueled by that. And it's great if somebody discovers that and that aligns with their. But if you're not into that completely, it's pretty hard to get to that place where you can compete on that level.
Yeah, man, I completely agree. Naval Ravikant, who I'm not saying his last name right, but he founded Angel List, and he's kind of like a modern day philosopher in a lot of ways. But one thing he talks a lot about is finding your specific skill. And he says your specific skill is going to be something that feels like play to you, but feels like work to others. And I would say for those of us who direct response, like long form sales letters, for most people, that is going to feel like work, but there's going to be some small portion of writers who that feels like play, and that's just fun as hell. And that's a specific skill. And I would tell you just to lean into it, because you can get really, really wealthy if you become good at it. But if it feels like work, you're better off doing something else for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Great advice. Real quick, John Fonte.
Yeah. I'm a fan. Yeah. He actually was a huge inspiration in Charles Bukowski's writing. And what was interesting is Bukowski ended up being a much, much bigger writer than him. years later, after Bukowski blew up, he found Fonte or Fanta, or however you say his last name. And he said, "Hey, I want to publish all of your books under Black Sparrow Publishing."
Right. Yeah.
Which Fanta, he was this prolific writer, and then diabetes ended up taking both of his legs,
right,
and blinded him. In his last 2 books, I believe, his wife wrote, and he just spoke them out. And I was like, Jesus, I mean, that's like a writing warrior right there. So.
Yeah. Right. It's his lifeblood. He had to do it. Yeah. For me, Ask the Dust was a pivotal moment, I think, in my young life, reading that.
I love that book.
Brotherhood of the Grape, a lot of great ones. So I'm going to take a hard left turn or right turn and talk about cookies. Because one of your clients that you talk about a lot, and you were very kind to send me some of these cookies before the interview so I could get an idea of what this company does. So I'll let you talk about it and talk about how you work with this company, because it sounds like they've given you a ton of creative control. I can tell you these cookies were a major hit here in the Rogers household. I thought, a few cookies would come, and it was a big box. In fact, I'll post this. I took photos and video. I even unboxed the cookies. I mean, it's like Apple sent you cookies, right? It's like this beautiful presentation, and the cookies are out of this world, and they all have super cool names, which you created, I believe. So tell me about Last Crumb and how you came to work with them.
Sure. So Last Crumb, I came to work with them through an agency called Truffle, and Truffle is ran by a really savvy ad guy / kind of creative director. His name's Raphael, but he hit me up and said they didn't have a big budget, but he was wanting me to write the copy for him. And I said I'd do it as long as I had full creative control over what I could write for the descriptions and the naming. And he gave me the green light there. So I was all in. And so I started writing the copy, and I'll read some names and descriptions here in a minute. But Last Crumb's really interesting because, and it's in and of itself, it's this beautiful like lesson in just creativity and business and marketing. But when you think about cookies, like the vast majority of cookies are priced between maybe like $1 and $3. And, maybe you could get someone to pay $4 or $5 if it's a really good cookie. But the problem with like pricing, what I hate about lower prices like that is there's always going to be someone that can undercut you on pricing. And so what Last Crumb decided to do is they decided to make a really, really good cookie and sell like each cookie for $12. So a whole box of cookies retails for $140 before tax. And then they send them directly to your door. When you bite in the cookie, you're like, okay, this is a $12 cookie. I mean, it's
right.
it's that good.
Yeah.
But like if you're pricing your cookie that high and it literally costs $140 for a box of cookies, you have to have not just a really good tasting cookie, but just from a brand standpoint, I mean, it has to kind of blow people's socks off. And so the design of the cookies are gorgeous. And like you said, when you open up the box, it's almost like you're opening up a MacBook, right? I mean, it's just stunning, and you almost want to keep the box. But anyways, they let me run wild. And so I kind of was like, damn, I wonder what descriptions I could write that don't sound at all like a product description. I mean, I think that this is just a good thing to keep in mind when you are maybe writing anything from like a copywriting standpoint, is like the places where copy is like generally really boring in brands is like a great place to innovate. And so I try to always get like weird in those places, and in naming and product descriptions felt like a good place to start with that. And so instead of calling like the Oreo cookie, I called it the James Dean, because I read somewhere that James Dean was like super into Oreo milkshakes. And then instead of calling the red velvet cake cookie Red Velvet Cake, I called it What the Fuck Velvet, because like saying fuck makes everything more interesting. And instead of calling the blueberry cookie, I called it the Not Today Mr. Muffin Man. And instead of like the cinnamon cookie or like the snickerdoodle, I called it Netflix and Crunch. And so, yeah, I just got like really, really weird on the names, and they really started to stick. And then Last Chrome was so smart because they just started sending these boxes out to all of these influencers. And it was cool because like, I think like they're saying they sent one to Christy Teigen, and like she like loved the copy and got a kick out of it. And so, yeah, man, it was pretty sick, but I'll read you a description. So this one is called the 50 Cent. And it's a birthday cake cookie. Generally, like how my mind works when it comes to like trying to write copy is take whatever creative they gave you. So it's called birthday cake. And then like just try to run in a completely opposite direction while keeping like a string tied to this idea of a birthday cake. And so then I started thinking, okay, like it's your birthday. That's a famous kind of 50 Cent song. So like, what if we called this cookie the 50 Cent? So I called it the 50 Cent. And then I just kind of wrote this ridiculous narrative about like how overpriced the cookies are and like how people who are older than us, who are maybe in their 60s or 70s, would just be so offended. And I wrote this description. Look, Grandpa, this confettied vanilla frosted masterpiece is called 50 Cent because of the famous rapper's hit song, It's Your Birthday. It doesn't actually cost 50 cents. We don't even know why we have to explain this. It's not 1939. Milk doesn't cost a penny anymore. The planet no longer reeks of mothballs. Parents don't make their kids walk 3 miles to school in the middle of a blizzard. Social security isn't a thing. People kind of make fun of it now. Are you listening, Grandpa? Yeah, I agree. Sam Cooke was considerably better, but you have to admit, Grandpa, 50s shit does kind of slap. He's 2000s as fuck, but damn. Anyway, please blow out your candles and stop bitching about the price. You'll understand the moment you sink your dentures into this ooey gooey buttery deliciousness. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, man, it was just, it was such a blast working with him, and it's kind of led to a bunch of other projects, which has been cool too. So yeah, I feel lucky to have been brought on to that one.
What I love about the descriptions is like you said, they're so unconventional, right? You'd be kicked off the Food Network challenge in a second for presenting something this way, right? Stop rambling, Cole. But they're short and they're interesting. It reminds me of a lot of your poetry, right? It's just, you spend, like I have 1 minute, please. And the premise, I think, is a page is supposed to take you about a minute to read and make you feel something, which it accomplishes well. And I feel like these do the same thing. They tell a story, they give some context behind the name that's memorable. And so we were kind of sharing the names. I had the whole family here Sunday because I saw this box of cookies and I'm like, oh, I have to, well, first of all, I have to devour the peanut butter one because it just looked amazing, and it was. And that was the Madonna. Then I cut them up into pieces and we all just sat around naming our favorites and laughing about the descriptions. And everybody remembered the stories of why they were called the things they were called, right? So it gave life to the cookie even beyond how amazing the cookies were. Yeah, it's just really brilliant, unconventional. Love how they're doing it.
Yeah, me too. And kind of the experience you just talked about, I think that's a big part of their success is people are popping open those cookie boxes at dinner parties. And now you have 15 people talking about like, oh, have you tried the 50 Cent? Have you tried the Netflix and chill? Like, wow, read this description. Oh my God, this tastes so good. You got to try it. And it's just causing like a bunch of stir. And yeah, and they're so smart too, because they've like baked in this exclusivity where you can only like, they release the cookies in these sort of batches, and there's only 200, 300 boxes. They get bought out in like 10 minutes and nobody can ever buy them. And it's clever.
Yeah, I literally, if not for you, I would never have these cookies probably, because by the time I see, I'm on text alerts and I can't get there fast enough, right? The only bummer is what I would love to be able to do is send people these cookies as gifts. And I can't because it's not predictable enough. So
I agree. And something I'm trying to talk to them about doing is figuring out a way to maybe work exclusively with specific people where they have sort of free reign to send boxes of cookies to anyone. And maybe they have to like sign a deal. Like I'll send 50 of these boxes every single year, but that's what I obviously can do that at any time. That's why I was able to like send you a box and they still cost like full price for me. But like you'd be surprised how many projects I've landed by just people being like, show me your work or whatever. And I'm like, sure, I'll just send you this box of cookies. And so I think it could be a huge benefit just for them to like work specifically like with influencers to be able to send them whenever.
Yeah, it's really smart. And I want to point out, a lot of freelancers listen to the show, and I don't want that to slip by what Cole just did. Like, he spent 150 of his own dollars to send me a box of cookie before this interview so we could talk about them right now. But that did so much. That's a way to invest in your, I mean, I don't want to reduce it to marketing, right? But we talk about showing our work. And what a cool dynamic way to show your work, to show that you're proud of your work. When you stay dedicated to a certain style, a certain result you're looking for with your work, and it cultivates in an amazing box of cookies with your copy backing it up and presenting it, man, that's a great calling card.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that, and I agree completely with showing your work, and it's such a competitive advantage these days because there's more writers writing about writing than there are writers who are actually doing writing, and that's in the advertising world as well as like any genre of writing. I mean, people love talking about doing the work, but very rarely are they sitting down and actually doing the work. And if you can create this lifestyle where you are working, making sure once you put out the work, it's sitting pretty on a site. So like always have like a good designer in your back pocket where you guys are coming up with work that doesn't just like read well, but it looks really good. And then turning around and just like sending that to the masses and like showing it off, bragging about your clients. And if you do that, I do think that like in the next 5 to 10 years, society is going to be kind of calling people like creators just in general out on their bullshit a little bit. And they're like, hey, you have 100,000 followers and you're tweeting about the creative process, but what have you actually created? And I think that that's a really great way to differentiate yourself right now.
Yeah, love that. It also reminds me of something I recently heard Kevin Harrington say. I don't know why I heard this. It was like a soundbite, but he's talking about the future and what's going to make the biggest impact. And he said, up until for the last decade, I think he said, I would have said tech, 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 tech. He said, now it's story, creativity, the ability to cut through the noise in a way that just isn't louder than other things, but it's more meaningful. And if you can tell a company's story and get across their brand in a visceral way, not just a visual way, like that's the immediate future of what makes an impact.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Cole, and this was great. I hope we can do more of these. Like I said, I'm a big fan, really enjoying all your stuff. Everybody needs to be on your list at honeycopy.com. I've seen your copywriting course. It's really tremendous. I love how you kept it simple. It's essentially you buy it, you log in, and it's all on one page. It's not a million modules. It seems like you get to add to it as you go in that frame. You just added, in fact, another section on naming, which we've just been talking about. So is that kind of the premise there? It's like, let me just tell people what they need to know, and then I can let it grow as I grow.
Yeah, that's a whole idea with that particular guide. Is I thought, I mean, what's a price point that pretty much everyone can afford? I'm not saying it's not expensive for some people, but if you work hard enough kind of outside your day job, you could like stack up the piggy bank a little bit. But then I wanted to kind of also give lifetime access. So I just said, hey, it's $97. You get lifetime access to the guide. And I want it to kind of be something that I continue to add to, because like I wrote that when I was 25 and I'm 27 now. And I feel like in the past 2 years, I've learned a ton just working with clients like Last Crumb and some other really cool brands. And so I just want it to sort of be a real time kind of update with like my own learnings, and hopefully it just like gets better with age.
Really cool. Dig it all. Cole Schafer, thank you so much for making time. I really enjoyed it. I hope we can do it again.
Yeah, man, absolutely. This was an absolute blast, and I appreciate you holding true to it being a very conversation-driven interview.
Oh yeah, that's my favorite. Yeah. No hacks here. We don't need hacks and tips. We need inspiration and motivation.
Yes, absolutely.
Hey, don't forget your goodies. Head over to copychief.com/copychiefradio to get some great free stuff to help you put the things you hear on the show into action
for your business. Copychief.com/CCR.